We cannot choose how we were born, why we were born, who we are the child of, and what the context surrounding our birth was, nor the time we were born. All of that is a matter of chance. There are a lucky few who choose how they want to spend their lives, ones who are unburdened by fate and social class, and those who walk the path which is wholly their own. And when it comes to death, we almost always have a choice. We could die whenever we wanted to. We can choose our deaths. And yet the choice itself is something most of us never dare to make. Instead, we choose to remain living. We often prefer to leave the matter of our deaths in the hands of random chance. After all, it was random chance which brought us into the world in the first place. But there are a few times when we see someone who chooses to die, and even fewer when that choice is the admirable one to make, when it is less a choice of selfishness or pain and despair, and one of selfless self-sacrifice. In a key moment, when a character overcomes their fear of death, standing tall to face overwhelming odds, planting a flag upon the ground where they will soon be slain, knowing that the coming battle is one in which they cannot win, but rather something which may help their allies win in the end instead. It is often the strongest among us who make this choice, and in their absence we will often notice the void they leave behind. However, we will always remember their sacrifice, knowing that our job, as those who still yet live, is to carry their will and see to it that their sacrifice was not in vain. Writing Last Stand is not an easy thing to do, but for those who pull it off, it can become one of the most compelling moments in your story, and more often than not, it can make a dead man live forever. Perhaps not physically, but in the hearts and minds of all those who hear his story. So that's the point of this video. How do we properly capture and convey the emotions behind a warrior's sacrifice? How do we write a final stand? When it comes to Last Stand stories, I am always reminded of the tale of Saito Musashibo Benkei, or just Benkei for short. It's an old Japanese legend about a warrior known as Benkei who became famous for his quest to take 1,000 samurai swords from honorable duels. Benkei was a giant of a man with a sense of justice and righteousness, and so he would only challenge those he believed unworthy or arrogant. It was said that after he collected 999 swords through duels, he met a young flute-playing man who carried a gilded sword around his waist. Now, this young man was much smaller than Benkei, and so one might think that his victory was assured. However, it was this same smaller warrior who ended up besting him. Frustrated with the outcome, Benkei sought revenge, and decided to challenge this smaller samurai once again, where he proceeded to lose again. The smaller warrior who bested him ended up becoming his master, and although his name is not important, his actions were, and the once rogue warrior Benkei became known as a retainer, and a loyal one at that. One day, he and his new lord had their castle surrounded, laid under siege, and as his master retreated into the inner keep to commit seppuku, Benkei chose his own form of honorable suicide. Standing on a bridge much like the one he had lost his 1,000th duel on, Benkei would buy time for his master to retain his honor. The soldiers who attempted to cross the bridge were swiftly cut down by Benkei, about 300 of them if the legends were to be believed. And so, rather than face the giant of a man in martial combat, the attacking army decided to kill him from a distance with arrows instead. After their volley was over, the soldiers saw that Benkei, riddled with arrows, was still standing upon that bridge. When a soldier brave enough to cross the bridge got close enough to take a look at him, the warrior fell to the ground, having been killed on his feet. Benkei's sacrifice was not a selfish nor vain endeavor like his prior quest to gather the swords of 1,000 samurai. Instead, it was to defend the honor of the one man who bested him in battle. And I think it's here we see what can make a last stand so compelling. But before we can write a compelling last stand, what we first need to understand is writing motivations, not what's happening, not how things are happening, not even why things are happening. We need to understand why the character themselves is taking a last stand. For a character like Benkei, his motivation was to protect the honor of his lord, yes, but those emotions can run so much deeper if we understand the context. Now, in Benkei's story, we have the context that the lord was the only one to have ever bested him in battle, and I think that makes his motivation so much stronger than if it was just a random soldier who did really good fighting on a bridge. For many of us, I think when we say he died to protect the honor of his lord, we don't really understand it on an emotional level. It doesn't really attach to us or resonate with us, at least not anymore, because most of us don't know what it's like to serve under someone we respect and admire. In most cases, if we're lucky, we have to serve under people that we can tolerate. Sure, we might have a manager at the place that we work, or someone who is our team lead, or maybe the captain of our sports team or extracurricular club, but we don't often know what it's like to follow a leader we truly admire, to have someone you look to for advice and guidance, for direction and inspiration, someone who will gladly help you in a moment's notice, someone who will serve because the act of serving them and helping to further their goals is fulfilling. That's the type of relationship I believe Benkei had with his master. We have a man who was strong enough to defeat hundreds of trained samurai warriors in single combat, someone who only sought to challenge samurai he believed did not deserve such an honor as to be called samurai in the first place. He could have continued to live his life on his own as a ronin, walking the lands and challenging people or selling his skills as a mercenary, and yet he chose to serve the one person who bested him in battle, someone who offered him a greater purpose than that of a simple wandering warrior. And when the time came for his lord, Benkei gave his life, not to save his lord, but to ensure that his lord could go out on his own terms, and by his own blade, rather than the blade of the enemy. Benkei was motivated by a love, respect, and admiration for the person he protected. It is that exact context which brings so much meaning to this ancient story. Yes, we might have heard Benkei's story told to us with only the last stand as context. We might have even felt it was cool how he died on his feet and slew hundreds of soldiers before he died. But I think it's the reasons he did it which make the story so much more emotionally resonant with me. So how do we capture that feeling in our own writing? Once again, we need to nail down the motive for this character. Why are they choosing to give their lives in this moment? What purpose does it serve? What hope does this character hold? What do they seek to achieve by sacrificing themselves? Above all, who are they doing it for and why? These are the questions you should consider before writing a final stand. Understand as well that while an altruistic and selfless motivation is often strong, it doesn't always need to be altruistic or selfless. What if your character worshipped such legends and seeks to die like that one day, for example? What if their final stand is a matter of necessity, and yet your character faces their death with open arms anyways? What if they are driven by spite and pure hatred for their enemies, to ensure that even if they might go down, that they'll at least make sure the survivors tell stories around the campfire and have nightmares about them long after their death? I don't talk about video games as much as I might like to on this channel, but one of the most formative for me growing up was the Halo franchise. I grew up with the original Combat Evolved, and I have memories of sitting on the couch with my dad watching him play the game as a young boy. Now, I probably shouldn't have been watching him play a game about shooting aliens, but hey, their blood wasn't red, so it was fine. Needless to say, I was a Halo fan for as long as Bungie was the one making it, and that's why in many ways, Halo Reach was a final stand, not just in its story, but outside of it as well. Halo Reach was the last ride for Bungie before they decided to hand the franchise over to 343. To this day, I personally believe it was the best Halo title. It had the best Forge mode, the best community, the best rank up systems, multiplayer, and campaign. Well, I mean, I guess Halo 3 probably had the better campaign in my eyes, but you get my point. I remember before Reach came out, I'd gotten a hold of these magazines called Game Informer for all you youngins out there. Basically the shit us geriatrics would read to get news on the newest upcoming titles instead of watching a YouTuber yap about it for the next few minutes, or looking on Twitter for the same shit. Before Halo Reach came out, I had always fantasized and wondered about what the other Spartans had been like before they died. After all, playing through the original trilogy, John 117 is the last of his kind. Yet, we always hear references and stories about the other Spartans. Cortana talks about them during the beginning of Halo 3, how each of them was smart and strong and a perfect soldier, and how John is just the luckiest of them, and that's the one thing that he had over all the rest of them. And when I heard about Halo Reach taking place before the events of Combat Evolved, when I read who I would be playing as, I was instantly excited. Yet it was bittersweet because even back then, I knew how this game would end. I knew what would happen to every single character, every single Spartan I met during the campaign. Me and my friends would talk about it at the lunch table, every death like it was a war story to us, remembering every Spartan who gave their lives. We occasionally played through the campaign together, living out that story as our own personal Spartan 3. And then we finally came to the last part of the campaign. We had accomplished our mission. The last helicopter had left Vietnam, and we were not in it. We were alone with only our weapons. A final stand against endless enemies of increasing lethality. No matter how good you are at the game, no matter how strong, nor fast, nor clever you are, no matter what weapons you have, nor armor upgrades, you will inevitably succumb to the hordes of Covenant soldiers at the end of Halo Reach. And in the final cutscene of the campaign, we see our Spartan fighting to his last bullet, to the last of his strength, cutting down the Covenant elites before finally meeting his own end. And as his body falls, so too does Reach itself. The planet is glassed, meeting the same fate as so many human worlds before it. Your Spartan meeting the fate of so many Spartans before them. And yet, as we look upon the barren wasteland to see our shattered helmet buried amongst the dust and rubble, we cut to the land revitalized. Our helmets still shattered, yet the planet renewed. Perhaps the pain and death we endured as a Spartan was not worthwhile in the moment. In the short term, we lived out a tragedy, not knowing if our sacrifice would ever be worthwhile. But in the end, it was. In the end, it was our sacrifice which allowed the events of the original Halo trilogy to unfold. It was the torch we passed to John 117 which allowed him to end the war. The final spark gifted to the last of our kind. Cortana echoing the will of every Spartan who fought and died before John. Finish the fight. There's something to be said about a last stand and its entwinement with war. There is no way to depict war without in some way romanticizing it. In a perfect world, evil people would never have the means to seize power and start conflict. Young, innocent men would not need to become murderers nor be murdered for the petty squabbles of old, guilty men. We would never be manipulated into thinking that war is some sort of glorious adventure where we must rescue those who have been occupied by evil forces. We would not sacrifice the peace and safety of those we love and those we do not know for petty things we could all be sharing instead. In a perfect world, we would recognize that cooperation is far greater than competitions with winners and losers. And yet we don't live in a perfect world. Yes, perhaps we can continue to strive for one, but I think there's also something to be said about the necessity of conflict. There are some things which can only be solved through fighting. There are only certain people who can be redeemed in death. Certain people who will only be stopped by killing them. A bully who will only stop bullying once you punch him in the mouth. There are certain things which can only be accomplished with our personal sacrifices, giving our lives to a cause which is greater than our own, meeting our end with rage and conviction. We carry the will of those who came before us and refuse to forget them. In doing so, we make it impossible for their sacrifices to be meaningless. And in Attack on Titan, we see a philosophical meditation on that exact concept. The brutality of war, the inevitability of it. Our freedom is often chased, yet never accomplished. Everyone is a slave to something. Our master is either another person or some sort of esoteric concept we're constantly chasing after. We are either slaves in the literal systemic sense or the metaphorical, wherein we are enslaved to our desires, our habits, our faults, and our fears, our instincts. There are many final stands in Attack on Titan, but for those who have watched the show, I know you're thinking about the same scene as I am. Erwin's final ride has to be one of the most compelling final stands that I've seen in fiction. It is here we see these fundamental principles on full display. Erwin knows he cannot make it out alive. He knows his sacrifice will be necessary to accomplish his goal to live beyond the walls. He recognizes that he won't get to see an answer to his questions, and yet he knows he is not alone in that tragic fate. Not just the soldiers he commands, but also the soldiers who have died under his command as well. He sees all of them standing around him, the ones who didn't make it, the ones who shared his dream and never realized it, the ones who would never get to see beyond the walls, or know what it was like to live unburdened. Erwin has survived it all, and for what? All of his struggle, his hopes, his dreams, his aspirations, all of his allies' aspirations, hopes, and dreams as well. None of it matters when you lie bleeding out on a battlefield. None of them got to see their efforts amount to anything. Even now, Erwin has not seen those efforts amount to anything. Neither have any of the scouts who still live. But Erwin convinces them to give their hearts and souls to the cause just the same, knowing that they will all die there, that they will never see their dreams realized, trusting only that their successors will do the same for them and remember them, that their successors will carry on the mission until someone sees it through to the end, until their child or their child's child sees their dream fully realized with their own eyes. And so they ride into certain death just for Levi to have his opening, just for that one moment to be seized, and for the Beast Titan to be brought down. Was it worth it? Was that the right thing to do? They will never know. They can only hope that it was. And by the end of the series, we really do still have to wonder if it was all worth it. In my mind, I think it was, because even though there is a cyclical nature to war and pain and bloodshed, that means it will eventually come to an end. That war and pain is not the only thing life amounts to. Those who are born into war may die in peace. Also that one day someone else can be born in peaceful times. The real world is pretty uncertain right now, and what we're witnessing before our eyes is the passing of greed and the slow, agonizing death of old men who cling to power, not for any cause that is greater than themselves, but because they believe themselves greater, seeking in their own way to be immortal, even if it means being remembered in infamy. The ones who pull up the ladder behind them thinking it will somehow help them. But in the words of Charlie Chaplin, so long as dictators die, liberty will never perish. Humanity will inevitably recover from its worst habits to push towards its ideal. Brick by brick, we will build and rebuild higher and higher as we have always done. A true hero is one who knows they are the only thing which stands between evil and the innocent. That if they fail, then everyone they know and love will die. And so a true hero is ready to shatter themselves if it means winning. If it means giving others a chance to rebuild the things which were demolished. They will pay whatever price it takes, and in a crucial moment, the hopes and dreams of others are no longer on the hero's shoulders, but rather pushing at their backs, propelling them forward to destroy the evil that they oppose. Undertale is ultimately a game of empathy, and Undyne is a true hero. During the genocide route of Undertale, we see a subversion of classic RPG storytelling. We are playing as the monster. Instead of being the player who is comfortably behind the fourth wall, we are instead playing as a monster for which the game recognizes and looks outward towards. We are the ultimate villain rising to commit atrocities for their own selfish means, and for no other reason than simple curiosity. The game itself frequently acknowledges the player's hand, their responsibility. It punishes the player, not by preventing them from fulfilling their curiosity, but by shaming them. Every life taken is yet more blood on the player's hands, not just Frisk's. It's very likely that this exact same player has completed a pacifist run before this, that they've befriended everyone in the underground at some point, gotten to know who they are, their hopes and dreams, aspirations and quirks, experiencing the game of Undertale for all the wonderful whimsy it has to offer. And then that curiosity, that sickening, insidious curiosity, the player knowing that these are not real people, that this is just a game to be completed, wondering what lies beyond that ideal ending, the peace achieved only by sparing everyone. What would happen if you killed everyone instead? And so up until this point in the story, the player is pretty much uncontested by any of the monsters in the underground. They have more experience in the game than they did when they first started, both mechanically and outside of the game. At every turn, you are given the option to stop, to spare at least one monster, and yet you persist anyway. In fact, you go out of your way to do so until you get to Undyne. At this point in the story, you've killed many, but you haven't killed everyone. There is still a chance. You may be a terror and a blight, but there are still people who can be saved. And if Undyne does not stop you here, then the only one strong enough to defeat you afterward is Sans. Undyne is one of the most difficult fights in any normal run, but by that point, you've already fought her and beaten her. And as you cut Undyne down, that's when she lives up to her title, Undyne the Undying. She knows the look in your eye. She knows what you will become if she does not stop you here, or at the very least, slow you down. And as she feels every soul she protects crying out for help, she refuses her own death. Undyne the Undying is truly seen for the first time during the genocide route, and she will strike you down. You're going to have to try a little harder than that if you want to kill her. We might think that this was a pointless final stand in the context of the game, that even with this power-up, Undyne is still destined to lose to the player. However, I don't think that's fully true. Sure, there are plenty of people who have defeated the genocide version of Undyne, but what about all the people who haven't? The people who start a genocide run, but who simply never completed, either because they don't want to go through with it or because Undyne is too difficult to beat. In some small way, Undyne's final stand protected many different realities in Undertale. She is a filtering event in that route, and even if she may die, her sacrifice still ended up saving people, and so she grins, defiant to your will until the bitter end. But what if we don't want to actually kill our characters? What if we reject the idea that a character must ultimately die so that others can realize their own dreams? What if we want to capture the feeling of a final stand without getting rid of the character? Is death truly necessary to realize a final stand? What is the true essence of a final stand? And how can we capture some of those same emotions in our stories without making a decision we cannot go back from? Well, if I had to say why I find A Last Stand so compelling for me personally, it's not just about the sacrifice, or the death, or the permanence of it, but rather the catharsis of the moment itself. The moment when a character is ready to give up everything just to accomplish their goal. It's not just about dying on your feet. It's about the character relinquishing their control of everything outside of themselves. Throwing up their hands and just saying, "What the hell? Let's see how far I can go when I don't hold back anymore." Giving up every last piece of themselves just to seize one crucial moment. That's what a final stand is. Your character does not necessarily need to die for it, but perhaps they do need to give something up. their inhibitions, their fears, their limitations, and in some cases, their futures. Because in the end, what happens when a character survives their final stand? I have this image of a warrior grinning while blood trickles down their face, accepting their death in a moment of euphoric bliss, having let go of everything that was holding them back, finally free of the desires and inhibitions which enslaved them for so long, living what they believe to be their final moments. All Might and Bakugo from My Hero Academia, Megami in the end of Season 1 of JJK, Guts from Berserk, Agnes Tachyon from Uma Musume, Dimple from Mob Psycho 100, Vegeta in Dragon Ball Z, Rocky from the movie Rocky. All of them have these moments in their stories where they are prepared to give up everything they have just to seize the moment that they're in. And in many of them, they do. All Might exhausts the last of his powers just to stop All for One. Bakugo gives his life to do the same, but is resurrected. Megami lets go of his inhibitions and the idea of perfection to defeat a special grade curse all by himself. Guts from Berserk gives a piece of himself every single time he's put into a situation like that. Agnes gives her ability to continue racing just to achieve something people thought was impossible. Dimple gives up all the power he stored to destroy the divine broccoli. Vegeta gives up the power he was gifted to slow Boo down. Rocky gives up the health of his body, his vision, his reflexes, everything, just to win the championship. A final stand requires sacrifice, but it doesn't always require a character to sacrifice their life. It requires that the character be pushed into a corner where their normal selves will not survive. However, the death of your former self can also mean the birth of your new self too. When we let go of our past selves, when we become unburdened by the weight life puts upon our shoulders, when we decide that we either achieve our dreams or die trying, that is when we capture the essence of a final stand. That is when we are reborn as something greater than what we used to be. That is when we open up a document and start writing.